Good evening. Hope everyone can see and hear me okay. So I'm watching the chat. So if you guys can hear me okay and I don't have any echoes or anything, let me know. I have a new computer, so this is a brand new setup with the streaming application and everything. And always concerned about echoes and whether or not the mic is picking up twice and all that good stuff. So if you guys can let me know how things look and sound, would be much appreciated. Try to go live a couple minutes early to give us time to work out any little kinks we might have with the setup. So, all right, good. So glad you can hear me and see me okay. So here in a couple of minutes we'll get started, and we will be doing kind of an impromptu Inkscape class tonight. I am sick of hearing about the coronavirus and thought, why don't I get everyone online and see what we can do, see if we can teach a few things tonight, and kill some time that way and give everybody's mind off of all the panic that's going on out there. So while we wait for everyone to get joined in here, it looks like we got about 90 people on now. Hopefully we'll have a couple hundred in this class and be able to get through this pretty effectively. So I'll tell you, like I said, I have a brand new computer. I just set it up yesterday, and have installed my applications and my fonts, and don't know if I've missed anything. So if I have a few hiccups, bear with me during the tutorial, but I think we'll be okay to get through this. So where's everyone at tonight? Of course, I'm in Louisville, Kentucky. I don't have Molly here with me this evening. She's upstairs with her mother, hanging out, taking it easy. Puerto Rico. You know, I've never been to Puerto Rico. That's somewhere I think I'd like to visit sometime. We were just down in Antigua, or Antigua, as they say it down in the Caribbean. But I would love to visit Puerto Rico sometime. Pittsburgh. I've been to Pittsburgh. We've got Allentown, Reading, Florida. All over the country here. North Carolina, Ohio. Ohio is pretty much close. I'm surprised you can even get on the stream. So, Iowa, Canada, Michigan, LA, South Carolina, Massachusetts. Wow, all over the country and beyond. So very good. We're up to 125 people. We'll get started here in just a minute. And what I will tell you, if you've ever attended any of my classes, either online or in person before, is that I do not really set an agenda and like a script and follow anything to teach. I start at the top left and work my way to the bottom right, and I kind of do it on the fly. And when I tell people, especially when I'm in class in person, I tell folks, if you brought a legal pad and you're going to write down steps 1 through 10 or whatever to do any particular function, you probably should pack up and leave, because that's not the way I teach. I like to teach the way I just have a little bit of a different style of teaching. I like to teach you how and why you use certain things, and then teach you how to use them, so that you have to understand the fundamentals of what things do in order to use them properly. So I have Inkscape loaded up here. I'm going to switch over to my desktop real quick, and hopefully you'll be able to see this okay, nice and clear. And like I said, hopefully we won't run into any hiccups here. And, I think a lot of people sit on their laptops and pull YouTube up on their smart TVs and everything these days. So we're using an iPad to watch while they're working on their laptop. I did make a nice big red cursor here so you can see it on the screen, hopefully a little bit better. And we'll start going through some things in Inkscape, and we will like I said, work our way from the top left to the bottom right kind of fashion, and talk about the different features and why you would use different features. And I will tell you, Inkscape is a very powerful program. It does a lot, and it will do a lot more than what you even will ever use it for in crafting. So, when it comes to the all the different features that can be used, that we really only touch the surface of it in crafting. So a couple people said I was frozen. So all I did was switch to my desktop. Let's see what's happening here. It is giving me a message. Let me see if I can make an adjustment here on the stream settings. Stream output, variable bit rate. It's asking for a faster bit rate, but I don't see. Oh, here we go. Let's see here. Let's see if that straightens it up any. Okay, a lot of people are saying it's good, so I made a little change there. We'll see if it straightens out and gets a little smoother. Matter of fact, while I'm talking, I'm going to switch back over to my desktop real quick and just see if it was something with the desktop session that created that. Inkscape has a lot of features, and we're going to talk about the features that I use and how I use them, okay? And they can be, very confusing, I guess, to some folks if you don't understand what and how and why you do certain things. What I'll tell you is that I have a playlist on my channel called Learning Inkscape. It has 8 videos in it currently, and it is set up so that you have 2 videos which you start with, which are kind of boring. They're me talking, and then the next 6 videos are challenges, and these challenges walk you through using all the fundamental tools. So some people are saying they left and came back and all's good again. Is my desktop good and clear? Are you able to see that good and clearly? If you could let me know that. Whatever you did, it's blurry now. So I am on my desktop. And while we work that out, bear with me just a few minutes here. I'm just watching the chat. There's a little delay between when I'm talking to the time I see your chat. So, there's several seconds there. So bear with me as we work this out. If it's blurry, refresh your browser and see if it comes back in clear again. Also, there's a little gear on your video at the bottom that you change the quality, and make sure it's set to the highest quality. So let me pull it up here on my screen and see if I can show you where that is located. Home. So hopefully it's not going to create any echo here. But down here, this little gear where you can set your quality, set it up to at least 720, preferably 1080, and that will probably take care of your blurry issues anyway. Okay, very good. All right, seems like most people are saying everything's clear, and if they're not, you can refresh or go out and come back in, and you're good again. So I am using Inkscape version 0.91. This is the version I've been using for the past few years, and it is stable. It doesn't tend to create any major problems for me, and there are newer versions. There's 0.924, I think. And then if you're on the Mac and you're using Catalina, the newest version of the operating systems, then I would you have to use version 1.0 beta or above to use Inkscape. The older versions of Mac required exports, so just keep that in mind. A lot of people don't understand the importance of installing from that link I posted that says how to install with Inkscape on Windows and Mac. And they'll install either the newest version on Windows or they will search for it in the Windows Play, or not the Play Store, but the Windows Store, the Windows App Store, or whatever it's called, and they'll install it from there, and then they can't find some of the functions and things like that. So, I really recommend running the version that I'm using here. All right, so what we're going to do, I'll give you the quick rundown of the desktop here, and we'll get started. On the left-hand side, down the left, you see a toolbar here with several tools on it, and we're going to talk about which ones of those tools that we will be using. And then, of course, across the top, your file menus, all your regular menus, and then there's a button row right below those menus that changes depending on which tool we're using, so keep that in mind. And down at the bottom, we have a color bar where we can choose different colors for objects. And then at the very bottom, we have a couple settings here that are kind of handy: the opacity and the lock and the layer visibility. We don't really work with layers much. It's more objects in Inkscape. As it relates to Design Space, Cricut Design Space, objects are the same thing as a layer in Design Space. But the opacity is here. And then over on the right-hand side, there's a couple toolbars. But the first toolbar here on the left side of those two columns is your typical. For example, if you've been around Windows for a long time, you used to have the file menu, and then under it would be a row of buttons. Like if you were in Microsoft Word, it would be like new, print, save, open, and that's kind of like this toolbar here. And the next toolbar is relevant to some nodes and different things. The only button where you really have to pay attention to here is this top one, and this is the enable and disable snapping button. And what that does is when you get close to an object, it'll jump to it. And so sometimes when you're working with some things like offsets, it'll say cusp to node, I think is what it says, but it's basically snapping is turned on, and you want to turn that off. So what we'll do first, we'll talk about the tools down the left-hand side. And the very first tool is your selector tool, this cursor, the black cursor button. And you will hear me repeatedly say, go back to your selector tool. And it's very important that you use your selector tool anytime you use after you do certain tools. So if you insert an object and then you want to do something with it, you need to go back to your selector tool before you make adjustments or do various things with it. The next tool is your node tool, and if you've been around design for a little bit, you've probably heard me talk about nodes and paths. So when you're creating any kind of an image or an object or anything in Inkscape, in Design Space, in Silhouette Studio, whatever it is, the machines are they're CNC machines, and CNC. Most commonly, most people see CNC routers and saws, so like carpenters and cabinetry makers and everything use CNC saws and routers. They throw a sheet of plywood onto a big flatbed. They use a computer to design it, and the computer will operate the saw and cut everything very accurately. And then, so nodes and paths are what's used for the path your blade will follow. So as you cut things like vinyl and heat transfer vinyl, or if you're writing with a pen, or if you're engraving, or whatever you're doing, as your mat moves forward and backwards and the head in the machine moves left and right, it's following paths, and it's kind of like just like a path you would drive your car on or walk on. It follows that. And the nodes are what I kind of define as intersections. So when an item comes to it's moving along a path and it comes to a node, it has to make a decision. Am I going to turn left, right? Am I going to turn? Am I going to curve? Am I going to go straight ahead or whatever? And if you have too many nodes, that can be a problem, because there can be way too many unnecessary nodes that can cause problems with your cuts. In the old days of Design Space, if you used Cricut Design Space more than a couple of years ago, it was designed in Shockwave Flash, and too many nodes was a serious problem for it. So the next button down, the little tweak objects by sculpting or painting, we don't use that tool at all. And then you have the magnifying glass. It's there. I don't really use it, and I'll show you why. There's shortcuts. I'll show you why in just a little bit. There are shortcuts that allow you to zoom in and out. There is a measuring tool. I don't use this a whole lot. Sometimes I do. Actually, the most I've ever used the measuring tool was when I used Inkscape to do like floor plan layouts for our warehouse. So I wanted to try to make things to scale, but I rarely use the measurement tool itself, because once you design what you're doing, once you put it in your Cutter software as an SVG file, then I use the measurements in there to adjust things. Next is the rectangle tool. So just like in your other design software with your Cutter, you can insert squares and rectangles. We do not use the 3D boxes. Next is the circle and ellipse tool, and we can insert circles. And we're going to go back and use all these, so bear with me as I just cover them and talk about what each of them are. The next is the stars and polygons tool. And then we have spirals, and I don't really use that tool. Very rarely will I draw a freehand line. The bezier tool is another neat tool that I do use sometimes, and I'll show you examples of how we can use that a little bit later too. I do not use the calligraphic tool. I do use the text tool, of course, so we can insert text on our screen and edit and create text, curve text, all those good things. I do not use the spray paint tool. The erase tool, I use it very rarely, but we do use that sometimes. It's not a heavily used tool, but it has its uses. The paint bucket tool, field bounded areas. This is something I do use quite frequently, and you do not use gradients, because an SVG file can't really have a gradient because you're cutting material in what we're doing with it. There is a pick colors tool, and we will be using that. And then there is a create diagram. So I don't really create diagrams with this tool. So what we'll do first is we will insert a shape, and we will start using these tools and working with them. And so first thing I'm going to do is insert a square, and I'm just going to freehand draw a square or a rectangle. It is not going to be perfect. It is not, as you can see, if I go back to my selector tool, there's that go back to your selector tool. And as I drew that, if you see up here, it is in 410 pixels by 542 pixels, and my measurement is set on pixels. And if I choose this, I can change it to different measurement types. I can put it in inches. So it is now 6 inches by 5.4 inches. And while I'm on this, let me go over here. This is something I normally do cover first. I forgot about this. Under File and Document Properties, this is a couple things I like to do. First, I like to set my default units to inches. And then I set my units down here on the custom size to pixels. I do have a video on my channel about sizing properly images in design, in Inkscape for Design Space. I haven't tested this in the newest version of Design Space, but it did have some sizing issues. And if you didn't have this set on pixels, when you would import your image, it would come in like 500 inches by 500 inches or something crazy. And here, this measurement here is your page border. So explaining the page border, in some of my earlier videos I turned this off because it used to annoy me, and you really need to have this on when you save your image. I failed to mention that in some of my older videos, but if you don't have a page or document border, when you save your SVG file, you won't be able to see a thumbnail preview of it. It'll still work okay, but it will not show you a thumbnail on your hard drive when you're viewing them. And one of the things you can do, the easiest thing to do actually here, I like to do this for size reference, is to set that to inches and set it to 12 by 12, and you see my page border went to a square, and then I can set it back to pixels. And here's the little thing that a lot of people really like, and I really think this is a must, is to click on the background color Right now the background color is transparent, so it's white. And if I'm going to work with anything that's white, it's going to be really hard to see it on my screen. And so under this button, if I go to the wheel and I click inside this wheel, I can drag this around and adjust the color. And so I like to adjust it to a gray color. And so I see a question in the chat, will those settings remain, or you have to do it every time you open it? So unless you save over your default SVG file, these settings will reset when you open it back up. I actually am going to make a video on how to do that. I'm not going to do that here because it takes too long to get through it. And when I do a live class, I'll walk everyone through this, and believe it or not, it takes like the first 15 or 20 minutes of the class, and it's the hardest part of the entire class because you have to get on the hard drive, you find it, and it's different for different versions and everything. But I will make a video on how to save that over top of it. And if you can find your default SVG file under your Inkscape install folder, that's what you have to do. So some people are pretty technical and they can find that. Alright, so we're back to our design canvas, and of course we have a scroll bar here, so I'll move that over. And when I click on an object, you see that I get the sizing arrows. So I can either grab it by the corner or I can grab it by the side and adjust the size of the object. And if I grab it by the corner, I can go size or height at the same time. If I click the object a second time, I get rotate arrows. So I can rotate arrows around, rotate an object around in circles. You will hear me speak frequently of shortcuts. I am a huge advocate of learning keyboard shortcuts. So you saw after I rotated that, I jump it back right where it was really quickly. Control Z, as in zebra, is your undo button, and that's true. Most of these shortcuts are true in most Windows programs. So if you learn your shortcuts, you will spend less time going to your mouse and trying to figure out how to right click and find things than if you simply use your keyboard shortcuts like cut, copy, and paste. Is Control C, Control X, and Control V. So a lot of those shortcuts you will want to learn. So yeah, that default SVG file, it's in the Inkscape folder. It's different on Windows systems from Mac systems, and it's also different if you're using 32-bit versus 64-bit version of Inkscape. Get that question a lot on which one to use. For most crafters, just install the 32-bit version on Windows. It doesn't matter for what you're doing. In most cases, that you don't have to have the 64-bit version. Like I said, that link I posted on the install, it describes all that. So when we're clicking on an object, if I go to the node menu, you'll notice I have these little things on the corners, okay? And I have them on 3 corners but not the 4th corner, and that's because this is an object and it's not a path yet. So in order for anything to go into Design Space or any other program for a machine to cut it, it has to be a path. And the way we make things a path is with the objects selected, we go to path, object to path. And now you see, since I'm on my node editor, I have a different node on each corner that is the same. Or excuse me, we have a node on each corner that's the same. They're not different any longer. And if I click on one of these nodes, I can drag it around and I can change this shape. And if I choose like right here in the middle to double click, while I'm on my node editor, keep in mind what tool you're working with. If I double click, it puts another node and I can further change the shape. So give everyone just a second to catch up there. So far we've talked about the selector tool and the node editor, and we've created an object and turned it into a path. And there are different types of nodes, okay? I tell people don't ask me what they're called because I don't even know. I just keep going till I find the right node that I need to use. And if I hold the control key on my keyboard and I left click on a node, you see how when I hover over that it turns red. And matter of fact, I'm going to zoom in here real close so you can see it. And if I hold control and I left click on it, it changes the type of node that I have. And you see that it put these little handles that are extended out from each side. And it also curved the path instead of it being a sharp corner like it was before. And if I grab one of these handles, I can swivel it around and I can change the shape with it. If I hold control and I click the node again, it changes the types of nodes that are available. And, oops, let me go back to that. Okay. And as far as, someone says their version is different and they're lost, as far as the things I've done so far, everything should be pretty much the same. I mean, these are basic functions, so there shouldn't be too much difference in what you're seeing here, no matter what version you have. Okay. And we can continue to, if we wanted to, we could insert more nodes in here and make more adjustments and curve these lines. And what you want to be careful of is, especially when we get to the point where we're tracing objects, like if we bring in like a JPEG or a PNG file and we want to trace it, if the image is not high enough resolution, you'll end up with a ton of nodes, which is a bad thing, okay? So let's zoom back out here, and I'll show you a couple keyboard shortcuts. Your plus and minus key at the top of your keyboard. Typically, I use the ones at the top. The number key seems to work just fine too. But the plus and minus keys zoom in and out in steps. So if you press minus, it zooms out. If you press plus, it zooms in. The other shortcut I like to use is the number 3 key. And if you're selected on an object and hit the number 3 key, it zooms full screen to that one object you're selected on. So plus and minus and 3 are the zoom in and out keys that I tend to use a lot. So we're talking about nodes, talking about making custom shapes and adjusting the curves and everything. It's important to remember when you're working with an SVG file and you save it as an SVG file that it's not really an image file. Files like JPEGs, PNGs, BMPs, and all that, they're called raster images. And those types of files, when you adjust the size of them, larger or smaller, it can affect the quality of them. An SVG or an EXF, those are vector images that it doesn't really affect the quality no matter what you do to it. If you were to save this as an SVG file and then open it in something like Notepad, you'll see it's a bunch of text. It's basically codes that are mathematical equations that show where all the paths are, how steep the arcs and angles are, and all those things. That's why you can adjust them without affecting the quality. Okay? So, now, of course, we have the magnifying glass. I don't think I need to show you what that does. You can draw a box and zoom in and out right over an object. And what we'll do is we will now insert a circle. And we'll zoom out a little bit. And when you're inserting any shape, any new shape, when you hold your Control-Shift key, if you don't hold any keys and you draw it, it's going to come out as a whatever subjective shape that you draw your mouse to. So I'm drawing an ellipse, okay? If I hold Control-Shift and I drag my mouse from top left to bottom right at a 45-degree angle, it will make a perfectly symmetrical shape. So there's a circle. And if I go to a square when I do that, it will make a perfect square. Now I have two shapes here. Now the difference is this one is a path, this one is an object. I just drew this one. So in order to make this one a path, we go to Path, Object to Path. And if I go to my node editor, you will see now that I have nodes evenly spaced all the way around it. You would think with it being a circle, it would need to have nodes all the way around it, but with the basic shape, then it can have the minimal number of nodes that are available there. Now, bear with me on the chat. I'm trying to keep up with that, so if other folks can. So if you click on document properties, it doesn't bring up anything. Sometimes it gets docked somewhere, and I've had a problem with that once before where I would try to open it. It would absolutely not open anywhere on my screen, and I couldn't find it. And I ended up having to uninstall it and reinstall it to get it back. It was really, really bizarre. Keep in mind, Inkscape is a free open source program, so even though it is one of the best free open source programs I've ever seen, it does still have some little bugs in it here and there. So we go back to our selector tool, and just like in our other programs, we have basically layers we can work with where things are in front of one another. Only this time we don't use this from the layer panel. These are objects, remember. And if I want to send this down, I can say lower, or I can say bring to front, lower to bottom, all those things as far as manipulating the position of different shapes. Now, if I insert the next shape down is the octagon and star, and again, when I click on a tool over here, you'll notice there are different tools up here on the top toolbar. And I'm going to insert a star. And I'll make this kind of big so we can see it here on the screen. And if you notice, my star it's symmetrical, but it's not like what I would call a perfect star. In other words, this point to this point isn't perfect, okay? And that's because of these settings. You can increase and decrease the angle of your spokes on your star. So if I click here, excuse me, that's the XY. Let me go back to my star tool here. I can control how many corners I have. So if I wanted to make this a multi-pointed star, or the spoke ratio is a setting where you can define how sharp your spokes are. So if I go to a 0.40, that gives us a perfect star. And again, if I choose more, whoops, didn't mean to draw an extra one there. So now we have some different shapes on our screen with 3 different colors. So hopefully everybody's following me okay on this. So just another example of when you have a tool selected, your tools across the top will change depending on what you're using. So if I go to a circle, you have different settings here. This brings up an interesting point. I want to show you something. Inkscape has inevitably what I call ghosts in the machine. And I would not normally say this if I didn't experience it myself. In other words, when you change certain settings in Inkscape, it will usually remember the last setting you had it on. So if you turn on fill or stroke or something like that, which we'll show you in a little bit, typically when you go back into it, it's going to have that same setting set. There have been many instances where people have asked me about this, and I have experienced it many times myself, so I know it happens on its own, where you use things, you close Inkscape, you open it back up, and your setting is totally different, and it doesn't react right, and it doesn't do what you expect it to do. And so, for example, when you're making a circle, up here there is a start and an end, and typically, basically, it's 0 to 0. So it starts at 0, goes all the way around, and ends at 0. So if I were to tell it to end here, when I draw this, I'm going to get a pi. So it started at 0, it ended at 21. Now if I run this up more, I can draw a circle, and a lot of times this is what happens. People will try to draw a circle and they'll get a Pac-Man shape, and that's because their start and end isn't at 0. So keep things like that in mind. Sometimes people will draw shapes and it will show them on the screen as, that there's a shape there, and they'll see this little dashed box around it, but they can't see anything, and that's because fill has gotten turned off somehow, whether they did it or Inkscape did it. on its own. So my star has a black outline because by default on mine, stroke was turned on. So that's actually a good lead into the next topic. So we're talking about a shape here that's filled with yellow and it has a black outline around it. And if I hit Control Shift F as in fill, or F as in Frank, Control Shift and then F, it will open my fill and stroke panel. Fill is the color that is filled in the object, and stroke is the outline that's around it. Now normally, like these shapes, let's see if stroke is on, and I think it is, but you just can't see it because it's a darker color. Stroke is the outline that's around it. And if I turn stroke off, you'll see that go away. And I'll do the same thing here by clicking that little X. And now I don't have stroke turned on, so you don't see the outline. Fill, if I turn fill off, that's what I'm talking about. You can see that there's a shape there, but you can't see the shape itself because it is not filled. And if I select it and I turn fill back on, whoops, probably should have left it selected, and turn it back on, and it comes back on. Now it came back on as a different color, which is fine. I can just go to my color bar and change the color back down here. The other things to watch for, you can have fill turned on, and if opacity is turned down all the way, like opacity is 0, which is basically transparency or how opaque it is, then it will be totally transparent. So you notice that fill is turned on, but we have no opacity. And if I grab that and turn it back up, then it comes back. Now I'll show you the last one that will cause this same condition here on the RGB panel. You know, RGB is red, green, blue. That's the 3 colors that make up colors on your monitor. And if any guys remember the old CRT televisions, if you got real close to them and looked at them with a magnifying glass, you could see a red, green, and a blue dot that made up the picture. So down here is alpha, and this is basically the amount of fill. So sometimes alpha goes to 0, and you see fill is turned on, opacity is turned up all the way, but alpha is at 0, so we can't see anything. So you have to be aware of those tools and how to use those. And we'll go back to stroke for a second. I'll turn on stroke so you can see that outline. And if I go to stroke style, I can increase the thickness of that line. Now, this stroke line is not what you may think it is. You may normally think this would be an outline to cut, and that is like an offset and is not the same. So don't think you can use, well, I guess you could use it for that, but you don't really want to use it for that. And I'll show you how to do an outset a little bit later on. Okay. Now, I'm going to show you briefly what the bezier tool does. I'm going to get rid of a couple of these shapes here. Make these a little bit smaller. So the bezier tool allows you to kind of draw and make your own paths and points. So if I take the bezier tool and I click, I can make shapes and go around and click and then join it back up to the last, back to the point where I started. And then if I were to change this to a path, go to the node editor, I could then begin to do some things with this and do like a wireframe shape and make my own shapes with it. This is a little bit of an advanced tool, but gives you an idea of what you can do with this. Okay, and this actually gives us a good little lead in to the I'll jump down here to the paint bucket real quick just because I have this on my screen. It makes it easy to show you. If I go to the paint bucket tool, and up here at the top you see it's set on yellow, this is a bounded area, meaning it's a totally enclosed border, and if I click there it will fill that area. And if I go back to my selector tool, you see I can pull that out. It's a different shape, kind of looks like a potato or something, but you kind of get the idea of what you can do with that fill tool. Now, one of the things I'm going to show you is that the fill bucket is not an exact tool, and you have to be able to get past that. So if I zoom in real close and look at this edge, you'll see that the yellow doesn't go all the way to the very edge. When I'm selected on the fill tool, I can say grow or shrink by a certain amount. That even if you grow it or shrink it, it doesn't fit exactly, the way that it should. It is good for creating shapes and duplicating a shape or something like that, but it is not an exact tool. And if you watch my Hello Kitty video on tracing an image, you'll see how you get around that most of the time with that type of an image when you're tracing it. All right, so next tool down, the text tool. So let me get rid of this. And we will insert some text. Now, I'm going to insert TroyTube here. Now, before we start this, I will warn you, this is what happens in a lot of classes. People insert text, they quit paying attention, they start making changes and start choosing their own fancy fonts and everything, and then they get lost. So my advice is to follow along. Don't make changes and choices that take your attention away from what I'm doing, because you get lost and you can't catch back up again. Okay, so be very careful what we're doing here and pay attention. Now, as it sets, I have inserted a word. Just like in Design Space or in Silhouette Studio or anything else, at its basic form, this is a font. If I double click on it, I can put my cursor in there and I can change letters. I can highlight it. I could change a font if I wanted to and choose a different font and do whatever I want to do with it. If I wanted to change the spelling or put a space in there, I could. Okay, it's an editable font still. The problem with this is that I usually see people will do this. They'll save their SVG file. They'll try to import it into their Cutter software and nothing comes in. It comes in blank. The reason is it's not a path. This is a font. Everything has to be a path. I can't stress that enough. The two things you hear me say over and over again is it has to be a path and go back to your selector tool. Probably the two most common things I say when I teach Inkscape. So how do we get it that way? The same way. We go to path, object to path. However, there's more steps to it with fonts. Now that we've converted it to a path, this is actually a set of grouped objects. And so if I go to Object, Ungroup, you see that it separated them. And I'll zoom in a little bit. You see they are all separate letters now. Now I have not clicked anything, so everything has stayed selected. Let me close this. So we have 8 letters that are now objects. They're not fonts. I can't change these. I can't edit them anymore. They are a path. And since they're all selected, I can go back to Path and go to Union. And now it is all one object. And if I go to my node editor and I click on it, you see all the nodes selected. Okay. Now, earlier I mentioned, so let's recap that real quick. Let me go backwards. I'm going to hit Control Z a few times here. And there are basically 4 steps to creating text that you can put into Design Space or any other Cutter software as a path. Number 1, you have to type your text. That's the first step. The second step is you have to turn it into a path. The third step, you have to ungroup it. The fourth step is you have to go to Path Union. Union is like weld in Design Space, so it's a permanent action. It makes it all one object. So hopefully you were able to keep with that. The 4 steps, again, type your text. Number 2, turn it into a path. Number 3, ungroup it. Number 4, union it. Now, earlier I mentioned how important it is to know your shortcuts. Okay. And I'm going to show you why. Now, I know you can't see me. So you're just going to have to trust me telling you what I'm doing here, okay? So this is text. You see I can put my cursor in there. Now, I know my shortcuts in order to do the other 3 steps, okay? So I want you to watch carefully, and I'm going to show you how quickly, using keyboard shortcuts, I can get this ready to save as an SVG file. All right, ready, go. That fast. I did all 3 steps in like 2 seconds. So Control-Shift-C was path, object path. Control-Shift-G is ungroup. Control+ is union. Okay. So that is why it's so important to learn your keyboard shortcuts, because you can be so much more productive with those. All right. Everybody is so quiet. I've either have you really captivated or I've put you to sleep. I see Rhonda Mobley has joined us. Rhonda, I was going to message you, but I didn't know if you'd be available to help me out here. So thank you for joining in. So Rhonda has an excellent YouTube video channel with videos on Inkscape too. She's one of our moderators in our group, and she helps us out a lot. So thank you for joining us, Rhonda. Appreciate that more than you know. So I can not pay as much attention to the chat now. All right. So now the eraser tool, I will show you briefly. This is why I don't really use it, because it's not, I just don't think it's that great of a tool. But there are some cases where it makes it a little bit easier to use. And so the eraser tool has 2 modes. One is if you touch anything with it, it just deletes it. Okay. So if you draw a line through an object like this, any object you touch with that line is just going to delete it. So all of your shortcuts are on your menus generally. So under path, if you look at object to path, Control-Shift-C is right there. Object ungroup is Control-Shift-G. So just look at your menus and look at the shortcuts that are right there on the screen on the menu beside the commands. Okay, so back to the eraser tool. The other mode is that it will erase, like slice through things. So if I do this, and if you notice at the top left there it says width 10, so it's set on 10 pixels. When I do that, it slices through it with a 10 pixel wide line. So if I wanted to make that, let's say 100 pixels, I can do that. The problem is you don't have real precise control, but I guess there's ways that you could use that if you maybe got a little creative with it. I just don't use it very often, but some people do. And of course, the fill bucket, like I said, can be used to fill bounded areas. And so again, the example I used earlier was the Bezier tool. I drew like a wireframe line, and that was in a bounded area. Now, any of these objects is actually a bounded area too. So this circle is a bounded area. This is a bounded area. The center of this O, actually the O itself is a bounded area. What's not a bounded area would be like this part inside the U. So there's an opening there. It's not completely closed. Okay, and so if I click on that shape, you see that I, in a way, duplicated it, but it's not exact. Like I said, that paint bucket tool is not an exact tool. And if I were to zoom in, let me get my magnifying glass here. If I zoom in, you see that it is not an exact tool, so there's a little bit of variance there. Now, what if I did want to just make another copy of an object or a shape or anything? Of course, you can copy paste, so you can Control-C and Control-V or edit, copy, edit, paste. You can also hit Control-D as in duplicate, and it will make an exact duplicate of something. Now, so Control D is a real handy one. Just like there's so many of these commands that you already know if you've been using other software like Silhouette Studio or Cricut Design Space. They just call them different things. So you have to learn what the similar commands are. So Control D for duplicate, and then in Design Space there is actually just a duplicate button. So you click on a layer, hit duplicate, and boom, you've got a copy paste all in one command. The eyedropper tool, the last one over here we'll talk about, is used to make an exact color of something. So if I want to click the eyedropper, and actually if I want to select an object first, and then I click the eyedropper, and then I click the other object, it will make it exactly the same color. So it's kind of like that color sync panel in Design Space over there on the right. You can click it and drag things from one layer to another, and it'll make them the exact same colors. All right, so how's everybody doing? It looks like Dar is having a really good time tonight with it. And like I've seen a couple people say they were lost, but you really have to go back through and watch this and do it at your own pace. And like I said, that Learn Inks, for anybody that's getting lost, that Learn Inkscape playlist I have might be the ideal thing for you, because you can do that at your own pace. It's set up in like short videos that are all roughly about 10 minutes long, I think, and challenges that I take you through how to use each of these different tools and functions in little bits at a time. So it can make a real big difference. Everybody learns different ways, so it's important to understand that. Whether you learn it this way best, if you learn it by the challenges best, if you Rhonda and some other folks out there have some wonderful videos, and other people have different styles of teaching and different styles of learning. Okay, so keep that in mind. So don't give up on it. I mean, it's just another software tool in your toolbox that you can learn. All right, so now we're going to talk about some tools that are up at the top in the menus, and most of the things that we work with are in this path menu as far as the different tools. And we've already talked about object to path, and there is a stroke to path, so we'll come back to that in a little bit, and we'll come back to trace bitmap as well. I don't use trace pixel art at all, so we'll come back to these two. But what we're going to talk about now are the functions below that start with union. Yeah, the Macs have different keys. I'm working on Windows, so keep that in mind. If you might have to figure out and you can probably Google that too to find out what the Mac equivalent keys are. So union is a weld type function. That's what they call it in Design Space. So if I were to put these two objects over one over the other and overlap them, and I go to path union, it will make them one object. So if I were to cut this in Design Space, it would cut all the way around the outside of it, and that's it. And even if they weren't touching, if I did path union, it still makes them one object. They're just two separate paths now that aren't joined, if that makes sense. Difference. So, and I know people get tired of hearing me say like Design Space, but most of my audience is Design Space, and Cricut. The Cricut user base is a lot larger, and people who are using Silhouette Studio generally do these kind of things in the Silhouette Studio software. So I like to relate these commands to Design Space commands. Difference in the Design Space, you have a slice function, and it does like 4 different things all at once. Okay, and what it will do when you overlap one object over the other, it will slice it, but then you'll end up with 4 different objects, and you can pick and choose which one you have, all in the one place. And what we do, let's say if I put this over top of this one, it's important to note, just like slice in Design Space, you need 2 objects, no more, no less, and nothing grouped or anything with whatever you're trying to do this function with. So we're going to overlap the two, and we've selected both objects, and we go to path difference. And what it does is it takes the top object and slices away the bottom object and removes it. So I'll do that again. Two objects, I selected both, path difference. And if you wonder, and again, I'm going back quickly by pressing Control Z. Z is in zebra, that's the undo. The next one is intersection. So if we do intersection, it leaves the overlapping part and removes the other parts. Okay, so we'll do that again. One object overlapping the other, path, intersection. Now we have both overlapped, and we do path exclusion. And this removes only the part that was overlapping. And I'm going to stop right here for a second. I'm going to show you where there's a good use case for this, because I actually love this function. I'm going to move these parts over here. And let's see here. Let me go. I'm going to go download a file here. If you didn't know, we have SVG design files on our website, and we have a lot of free ones too. So if we go to the free downloads, and I go to the awareness section, and I'm going to download this awareness ribbon. And I'm going to put that over here in Design Space. Now, and we'll make it pink just for aesthetic purposes here. How do I select two objects? Just draw a box around them with your mouse. Or you can hold either Shift or Control. I can't remember which one, but let's see here. Control, and that's Shift. So if you hold Shift, you can select those, or you can just draw a box around it like that with your mouse too. A little bit harder if you have a touchpad. I really recommend a mouse when you're doing this. So back to this ribbon here. You know, one of the things we used to get a lot of requests for back when Tammy and I were making crafts and selling them were awareness ribbons and decals and different things. And this is one of the effects I would do. I would take a name like this, and I would overlap it over a ribbon. This is a really cool effect. So I want you to just pay attention here, okay? I don't want you going out trying to download this ribbon file and trying to do this live on demand here. I'm just showing a case use, or a use case, I guess. I said that backwards, for how you would use that particular command. And if I were to put that over top of that, and I go to path exclusion, whoops, sorry, I probably forgot to ungroup some things there. Path exclusion, and you see that it kind of does a reverse cutout of the name. Now, I didn't really take time to position that, so I got some little itty bitty pieces there, but if I was doing that for real, I would have scaled that a little better and positioned it a little better. But you could cut that out of vinyl and make a decal out of it without and have it all one color. It's very legible. Makes just a nice little effect. I made a lot of things with decals and tumblers and things by doing that effect. So that was the path exclusion command. All right, so let's go back to these shapes, and we'll take a look at the last one here, and that is path division. And what that did was it took away the one on top, it sliced out the one on bottom, but it left both pieces. And if you have done this in Design Space, actually, I have Design Space open here. I can show you that real quick. If I insert a circle and a square, and then I slice it, it does all four of those in one command in Design Space. So if you think about that, those 4 commands I did, difference, intersection, exclusion, and division kind of all did the exact same thing, but it's all in one command in Design Space itself. All right, so far we've talked about the object to path command, union, which is like weld, then the 4 commands, which are like slice, difference, intersection, exclusion, and division. Okay. I don't use cut path. I don't even know what the heck it's used for. We'll go down to combine and break apart. So let's do this with combine. It's probably it's a kind of a tough one. In Silhouette Studio, they actually have a command called combine paths, and it's the same function. So I'm going to duplicate this circle here, and I'm going to make it a little bit smaller. Let's change colors so that we can see it, and I'm going to put it over top of it. Now, here's a good time for me to show the align panel. So if I hit Control-Shift-A, as in align, it will bring up the align and distribute panel. And I can, with both objects selected, say center this way and center this way, and now the 2 circles are perfectly centered. And if I select both of them, there's a couple of different ways I can make this into like a donut, or maybe that coffee ring type layout. One we've just covered. I could do path difference, and that would slice it out. Now remember, these are paths. So the outside of this circle is a path. The outside of this circle is a path. The color of the objects is totally irrelevant, really. It's just for how it looks on your screen, because once you put it in your machine, the color is going to be dependent on the material you put in to cut with it. Okay, and if I select both of these and I go to Path Combine, it actually kind of does the same thing, where it combines the 2 paths. And now I have a path out here, and I have a path inside of here. If I move it over here, you see it's transparent. You can see my document border behind it. So there's multiple ways to do kind of the same things. So, and hopefully, I'm just taking a peek at the chat here real quick. Hopefully, Dar's gotten back in there. Are you seeing the screen okay? I don't see anyone else saying they're having any problems with that. So hopefully you were able to load up and refresh and get back in. And must not be doing too bad. I got 219 people online watching right now. So hopefully that is beneficial to everybody that's in here right now. I'm very pleased with how smooth the streaming is going so far. I have to tell you that. This has been a much better experience than when I tried a couple of years ago when we used this program. Path combine. Yeah, so compound paths. That's the kind of the same thing. So if you use Silhouette Studio, compound paths or combined paths are pretty much the same thing. Now, that leads me into the next command, which is break apart. And if I select that object and I hit break apart, look what happened. I broke the 2 paths apart. So we combine paths, so we can kind of join paths and combine them together. We can also break them apart. Now, let's talk about, there's 2 commands coming up here next. There's inset and outset, and then there's linked offset, okay? I'm going to show you linked offset first, and then we'll go back and look at inset and outset. So I'm going to insert the word tree tube again. And I'm going to just change the font to something a little bit thicker. I think I have probably Impact installed. So Impact font is a nice thick font. Or I tell you what, we'll use Milkshake. Milkshake's a great free font for personal use from Laura Worthington. Laura Worthington is the creator of the Samantha font. That beautiful font everybody loves to use, has all the swirls and everything. Yes, break apart is different from ungrouping. So ungrouping only ungroups grouped objects. And grouped objects do not become one. They're just kind of joined together for the purposes of resizing and moving them around. And I should point out, it's important that you don't have anything grouped when you save your SVG file, because it will group them all together once when you save it. If you group things and then you save it, it will have groupings inside of groupings, and when you upload it to Design Space, at least on the web version, I haven't tried it on the new version, it got really wonky. So it's best practice to not group before you saved. So Glenn is asking, is this now going to cut the inner and outer paths? Yeah, so when I had that donut shape on the screen, it would cut the outside and then cut the inside. Hope that answers your question there. I don't have a translation sheet. Maybe I should do that. I mean, that's a good idea. See if we can put something together like that. A lot of people have asked me to write a book on Inkscape, and man, it is hard to find time to write a book. It is so much easier to make videos. I might do that at some point, or make some kind of a guide or something. That's a tough thing to find time to do. Our business has grown so fast, and I tell you, here lately, if you've been paying attention, I'm really just now getting back into doing videos and getting things under control. So break apart, my best example for break apart would be to go watch, after we get done here, go watch the Hello Kitty file, the video on how to trace Hello Kitty. I'll show you exactly what you would use that break apart for. It's a very, very handy feature. So I have, I'll tell you, that just doesn't look right for a very good name. So I'm going to put my wife's name up here. It looks a lot better than TroyTube does in that font. Tammy joined me for a little bit on my live video last night. I love when she's on my videos. We just got back from vacation the other day. This font is Milkshake. So if you search Milkshake font, you will find it. It is a free for personal use font from Laura Worthington. If you want to know about using that whole Samantha font, go watch my video on using Samantha font. The only difference, though, is in that new version of Design Space, you have to use Control V as in Victor to paste. You can't right-click and paste yet in there. So I have already made this into a path. So if I select my node editor, you can see that it's a path. Again, to do this, you have to have it as a path. A lot of people just search TroyTube Hello Kitty or TroyTube Trace. Probably you'll find that under my Inkscape how-to playlist to see that. So a lot of people ask, how do you do an offset on a font? And then they say, well, how do you do it on an image? Well, it's the same thing, because this is really an object anyway. This is no longer a font. I've changed it to a path. So you follow the exact same things, okay? And so with this selected, I'm going to go to Path, Linked Offset. And you'll see that it put this one little node up at the top. Now, sometimes this is like over in the middle or something somewhere. I'm not sure how it chooses where to put that node. I think it might be like the topmost point of the object or something. But what I'm going to do is grab that with my cursor and just drag it out. And you notice it makes it all fat, so you can't really see it as well. But what it's done is it actually created a layer behind the object. And if I were to go down here and select a color, it will change the color of that lower layer. So if I do this, I can drag that off so you can see that. I'm going to show you another good example here of how to use break apart too. This is another good example. And so now we have the name and we have the offset layer underneath of it. Now, here's the thing. This is where a lot of people make a mistake. They will then save this as an SVG, upload it, and they only get the name. They don't get the lower offset layer. The reason is, you guessed it, it's not a path. So until I go path, object to path, it's that object is not a path, okay? So now if I go to my node editor, I can see that both of these layers are paths. Now, here is our case for break apart. This is a real simple one. You just have one hole here. Sometimes you do this depending on your letters. You might have a bunch of holes and things in your letters and you want to get rid of them all at once. I could select this and go path break apart and then path union, and it makes it all solid. So imagine if you have several letters with a bunch of different cutouts in the centers and everything that you want to do that, then you would be able to break apart and union that in one step, or 2 steps, I guess. Real easy. Do that again, please. Okay, so we'll go back. So we have this. Again, this is a path. Okay, you always want to be working with paths when you're doing these things. So with this selected, path break apart. Now I'm not clicking anything. This is one of the important parts. You don't click anything because you already have it all selected. You see this part, this part, this part. These are all separate objects that are all selected. So I haven't clicked anything. I did path break apart, and then I'm going to go path union. And now it's all one piece. Yes, Dar, you have to object to path. Object to path, go back to your selector tool. Those are the 2 things I say all the time, repeatedly, over and over again. Yes, it is easier to pause with a remote than to use the mouse. Yeah, Rhonda is exactly right. A lot of times people don't convert the text either. So both ways, it is a everything has to be a path. If you save an SVG file and you bring it into Design Space or anything else and something's missing, chances are you didn't make it a path. So Betty says you can't get the first part. Are you talking about doing the actual offset, Betty? Is that what you're missing? If that's the case, we'll go back. I'll do this whole thing one more time. This is something a lot of people like to see over and over again, so it doesn't bother me to do this again because this is one of the most desired features people have out there, and that is the offset layer. Again, I've created the name, and I've already turned it into a path, ungrouped it, and unioned it. So this is all one object, okay? And it'll be the same thing if you were working with any kind of a shape that's a path. You cannot set it to default back to the selector tool because that would be annoying to a lot of people because a lot of people don't want to go back to the selector tool. So you have to go back to that and select it. You only mess that up a few times and struggle with it before you really start to learn and remember to go back to that. Okay, I got you, Betty. We'll do this again. Again, I've created the name. I have gone object to path. I have ungrouped it, and I have unioned it. So this is a one object path. And then, okay, so you want to see after I typed her name. Okay, so let's go all the way back then. Let's just go all the way back, start over. We'll do it all again and get everybody on the same page here. And so I've typed her name. I'm going to change the font. I don't think anybody will have any problem doing this part of it because it's the same in just about every program. So I've typed her name, and this is still a font. I can select and change the font here, okay? And the steps you have to go through, this is step 1. I've typed her name. Step 2 is I go object to path. Step 3, object ungroup. Step 4, union. I actually have a separate video under my Inkscape how-tos that show exactly how to do this whole process too, by the way. So if you don't pick it up this time, feel free to go look at that. You can search on TreeTube and Shadow, and you'll find that video on how to do this. So now that this is a path, we're going to go with it selected, path, linked offset. And then we're going to grab this little node and drag it out. And just so I can see it, I'll change the color. And again, with that layer selected, I'll go path, object path. And that is my two pieces. And then, of course, I'm going to go path, break apart, path, union. And that is our finished 2-layer product. So hopefully everybody picked that up. Here's another, I mean, you can keep this going too. I mean, if you wanted to even select this layer and then go path, linked offset, and do it again, and then change that color. And then change that to a path. Then you could have a 3-layer effect. So you can do some pretty cool different text effects with that. Okay. So now we're going to go back. We're going to do a, okay, so we're going to the linked offset. So someone's asking about linked offset and the offset command. So we're going to go back to actually now and do that. We're going to talk about the inset and outset commands. So inset shrinks your paths, or outset expands your paths. And this is the way you can either make paths narrow or more thick, depending on what you need. So if you wanted, say you were working with a really, really thin font, and again, almost all of this, I have different videos on it on how to thicken lines and fonts in Inkscape. You could make your lines thicker or thinner depending on what you're wanting to do. So inset, if I go path inset, which is also control left parentheses, you can see that it thinned out the lines. And if I keep hitting that on my keyboard, it will make them thinner down to the point where they're almost unrecognizable. Okay. Outset, which is path outset or control right parentheses, will make them thicker. So if I select my object and I go right control right parentheses, or if I select path outset, it will make them thicker. Now, where does that come in handy? Let me show you this. I will type Tammy's name and we'll pick the Samantha font, which is a really thin font. And you'd imagine, depending on how small you're going to cut this, it might have problems cutting, and depending on which material you're cutting it out of. Laura Worthington actually about a year ago released, a little bit over a year ago, released the Samantha Craft font, which by default was a thicker lined font for cutting different materials. You know, if you're cutting heat transfer vinyl, this will typically cut pretty well, pretty thin. But if you're cutting adhesive vinyl or cardstock, things like that, the thinner, you know, every material has its limitations on how thin and tiny it can cut. So with the Samantha font, if you're using the regular Samantha font and I want this to be thicker, first I have to turn it into a path and all those things. Got to do those 4 fonts. When I hit the control right parentheses, I can thicken it up and make it just a little bit more bold. So I'll go back. Let use a lot. Sometimes, let's say, let me put these together. Let's say this is like a really small word and I'm in here. When I try to outset, by default, the settings over, if you were to go into the preferences and look, I think the default setting is a 2-pixel outset at a time. Okay. And if I have a really small word and I outset it, it can make it so bold it doesn't look right. Okay. You see how messy that looks. The reason is because this is a small word. 2 pixels is a lot. So what I'll do a lot of times is I'll zoom way out. I'll make it really big. And then I'll start doing my outsets, because 2 pixels doesn't mean as much. So at that scale, I pressed the control right parentheses about 10 times just now in order to thicken that up. So I hope that makes sense. It was a matter of making the 2 pixels have less effect on what I was working with because I was zoomed out and I made this really big. So hopefully that made sense to you. It's just a little trick I use. It's real quick and easy, and it makes it a lot easier to deal with those changes. Well, thank you, Brenda. I'm glad this is a game changer for you. So if linked offset's not working for an image, typically the image is either not a path or it's grouped with something or something like that. So remember, it has to be a path. So especially if you bring in anything that's like a PNG file or something, you're going to have to trace that first before you can do any kind of an offset or anything with it. Brain overload. Yeah, this is a lot of information. So you might be a good candidate for that challenge class lit playlist. So the Learn Inkscape playlist. Looking at the questions here, can you convert an image? Yeah, of course I can. Yeah, I'll do that here in just a minute. I'll show you how to do that. So we'll get to that tracing an image here in just a moment. And I'll probably do that in a simple way for this purposes of this class. The last command I like to cover in this class is the simplify command. It's kind of a hard one to do, though. I'll be honest, I'm not prepared to show that one because I don't have the image I normally use to show simplify. But I'll explain what it does for you. If you were to search my YouTube channel, I'll bring this up. If you were to search TroyTube, is it simplify? Whoops. If I could type simplify or cleaning up. Here it is. Tracing and cleaning up simple images with Inkscape. I show you some examples in this video of how to clean that up. And the example that I use in this video is an image I found online where somebody just drew and traced a ghost. If you look real close, you see how rough the edges are. And in that video, I show you how Simplify can help you smooth those out. So that might be something you want to look up for that simplify command. I'm not prepared to show that and demo it right now. So what we'll do, let's see here. We are almost an hour and a half in. Man, time flies when I go through these classes. It is takes a lot of time to get through this. I'm going to look at the chat here real quick. It is ironic. The simplify is complex. It's hard to explain. It's kind of like, I tell you what, I'll show. I just realized how I can probably show this to you. I'm going to freehand draw a line, and let's see if we can do something here to make this really jagged or something, because I might be able to show you this. All right, this is probably not a real good representation. I'm just kind of doing this on the fly here, so bear with me. So you see how I just freehanded that, and it's not very smooth. There's a lot of little points and jagged edges and things. It's not real smooth. If I look at the node editor, let me turn this into a path here. So if I look at the node editor, you see all these extra nodes here that really shouldn't be needed. And one of the things I could do is, like, I could take my node editor and I could highlight a group of nodes like this, and I could delete them, and I could smooth this out manually. And you see how I'm kind of, smoothing that out by deleting all of those nodes. And I'll go back to this level here. And you see we're back to where we have all these nodes. If I go to Path Simplify, it'll reduce those nodes for me and tend to reduce all of those little jagged edges. If I do it again, it'll further simplify it. If I do it again, it'll further simplify it. And you see how rounded the curves and edges are compared to the way it started. Okay, so simplify will reduce the number of nodes. Now, one of the things you have to be careful of is simplify doesn't work well a lot of the times, because depending on your image. In that video with that ghost I just showed you, I show a pretty good example of how it can work for you. A lot of times simplify, I guess, oversimplifies things, and it can really distort the image you're working with. So this is, it can be useful. I don't use it a lot, usually because I'm kind of like OCD about it, and I like to manually adjust the nodes myself and make those changes, but it is what it is. All right, so who wants to see me trace an object? Everybody, pretty much. So I have on my desktop here a bunny silhouette, and this is let me see what kind of file this is. This is a GIF. And it is GIF. It's not GIF. People like to call it GIF, but the creator of it says it's GIF. I had this argument with my son a couple of weeks ago. So what I can do, I can either do a file import, or I can just drag and drop it in there. And when you get this box that says import, if you want, you can just say don't ask again, hit OK, and it'll come right in. Okay. Yeah, my son, it was kind of funny. I was with my daughter at my son's house a couple of weeks ago, and he was arguing with me over whether it was GIF or GIF, and Tatum and I started making fun of him when we started saying, yeah, we want to go to Atlanta, Georgia. so we were giving him a hard time about that. I don't sound like I'm in Kentucky. Well, it's a long story. I grew up in West Virginia. I actually, for the most part, didn't have much of an accent until I actually moved to Kentucky. And I'm in Louisville. I'm not in like eastern Kentucky and like coal mine country, like southern West Virginia, West Virginia kind of country. So I've never had really that kind of an accent. When I lived in West Virginia, I traveled all around the region, and I kind of lost my accent because I was working in like Pennsylvania, Virginia, Ohio, and everywhere. And I almost didn't have an accent. And then when I moved to Kentucky, I was here for like, 2 years. And I was talking to somebody one time, and I said, did you watch American Idol last night? Now I stopped like dead in my tracks, and I went, did I say idol? So yeah, I've picked up a little bit of the accent here. So this image, this is a pretty good example because we have the silhouette of the bunny, but we also have this block around it, the words, the little owl or whatever that icon is down there, and so we're going to trace this and show you how to create an image. Now, of course, this is a copyrighted image, and I want to encourage this, all the standard disclaimers. Just want to show you somebody, for training purposes, how to trace an image. A lot of times you have to do this with logos and things too. So with the image selected, this is one of the important parts here. You have to have your image selected when you do this. And we're going to go to Path, Trace Bitmap. And this little box should open. Sometimes it opens like docked over here on the side, but usually it'll open right up for you. These are the steps I use to trace. There's probably different ways you could do this. So you could hit colors. And since this is down to just a black and white image, I'm going to run it all the way down to 2. 2 is the lowest it will go. And tracing images, you typically know, you choose the number of scans based on the number of colors plus 1. In other words, if it's a 3-color logo, you would put it on 4 in order to select your colors. And sometimes you have to tweak that just a little bit just to get exactly what you want out of it. But I'm just going 2 colors. I'm going to uncheck smooth, because smooth is kind of like that simplify command, only it does it when you trace. So you want to avoid doing that in most cases. Stack scans is not necessary here because we're not doing multiple colors, and we're going to select remove background, which is going to remove all the white from it. And if I hit, so Steve, my shoelace, I'm guessing that, Steve, I guess that must have been the paracord videos that I've done. That's funny. Oh, that's right. You used to do paracord. I remember that now, having that conversation. So we hit update and it'll show you a preview. Again, if you don't have your object selected here, it's not going to show you a preview. So keep that in mind. And I'm going to hit OK because this is such a simple image. When I click this, it's going to take like a split second. It's not even going to look like it did anything. So I'm going to click it now. And you see how fast that happened. Now, if I go over here, I'm going to close this box, get it out of the way. I can grab this and drag it off. And now you've seen that I have traced that image. And I can delete my original image. So now, if I click the node editor and click on this, you see that I've traced it, and that is now a path. And there's a couple different things I can do here. Remember that eraser tool? This is where it might come in handy. So let's see if it erases the whole thing or just this line. Oh, it erased the entire thing. So we're not going to be able to do what I thought there. I thought maybe I could erase that line. In order to do that, I would have to use the other function. So we're going to put it on the node editor. And what I'm going to do is select this. Now I'm going to be careful not to overlap the bunny here. Okay. So I'm going to create that. I'm going to select that. And you notice it kind of gets all jacked up, but that's because this outer path, this frame is a path, and I kind of broke it, so it's overlapping right now. I'm just going to leave it alone, and I'm going to keep deleting it. Get rid of the words down there. And there. Now you see that I've gotten rid of that whole frame and everything around it. So take a breather right there. Let me get a drink. My sip right here. You still do any paracord, Steve? I have a ton of that stuff. Oh, you know what? I need to ship that. I promised someone I'd ship them all that stuff. I was going to donate it, and I kind of forgot about it. I need to get that out of here. So actually, Rhonda, Corel can do vectors too. So it's in the same realm. We actually, a lot of people use Corel for lasers. So Corel will save as a DXF file like Inkscape will, but it has, it's like Adobe Illustrator. There's like some differences there with it. And used to use it quite a bit. But Inkscape is kind of like, for crafting, I don't know why you would really use much more than Inkscape. So now we have our bunny traced and everything. If I go to my node editor, I can see my nodes around it, all that good stuff. What do you say we save this and import it into Design Space? So I'm going to go to File, Save As. We're just going to save it on my desktop here. And I'm going to call it Bunny. Now, here's the part that a lot of people ask about. I'm saving it as a plain SVG file. There's different types of SVG files. And typically the 3 types you save as are Inkscape SVG, plain SVG, or optimized SVG. The differences are plain SVG. So Optimized and Inkscape can save additional information in the file. Remember earlier I said that an SVG file is not really an image file. It contains all kinds of information. And so saving as a optimized or an Inkscape SVG can save information in the file that's not really used by Design Space or other programs. And really, Design Space has been really picky over the years about certain little things in SVG files. So I save as a plain SVG file to try to simplify it as much as possible so you don't have to worry about extraneous information in there. Not that I've necessarily ever run into anything, but you never know. It is real finicky when it comes to that stuff. So I always choose plain SVG file. If you save as an Inkscape SVG file, it will save things like font information. So if you're designing something and you want to come back later and finish editing it, you want to save it as an Inkscape SVG file so it will remember all that font information and everything in there until you get to the point where your design is finished and you want to save it as a plain SVG that's kind of like final and locked down. You know, you're not going to make any changes to it after that for the most part. Now, here's another question I see a lot where people actually say, when I try to close, I've saved it. And you see up here at the top left, it says it's saved as bunny.svg, and I've saved it. I know I've saved it. I can see it on my hard drive. But when I try to close Inkscape, it says you're closing without saving it. What it means is you haven't saved it as an Inkscape SVG file. If you know you've saved it, you're finished with it and everything, you can hit close without saving, and it's going to leave your file on your hard drive just fine. Now, there's all my shapes I was slicing with earlier. If I hit upload and I hit upload image, if I go back here, I can either browse for it or I can grab my file and drag it and drop it over here, save it, and I can insert it into my design canvas, and there it is. And you see over here, I was working with our logo earlier, so I have a layer there I need to get rid of. But there's our bunny. Now, one of the important things I want to point out here, you notice on my desktop, the bunny has an Internet Explorer icon. As I mentioned, this is a brand new computer. I have not installed the extension yet to show thumbnails for SVG files. A lot of people will see this, and sometimes they'll be associated with Google Chrome, so the icon will look like the Google Chrome icon, and it'll say Chrome HTML file or something like that. And a lot of people will see that. The world comes to a standstill until they get an answer on this, and that is, why are my SVG files now Chrome documents? That only means the SVG extension has been associated with a browser. Okay, what I mean by that, I want to show you this. If I open my Windows Explorer and I'm looking at my file folders, and I'm going to go over here and I'm going to look at my desktop, you notice I only have those 3 files here I can see, but I can't tell what kind of files they are. If I go to File Options and I click on the View tab, by default in Windows, Hide File Extensions for known file types is checked. If I uncheck that and I hit Apply, now you can see I can see that it is bunny.svg. This is bunny1234.gif. This one is troytubethumb.jpg. So this was the thumbnail for this live video that I did. And generally, it's a good practice to keep that turned off so that you can see your file extensions so you know which one you're working with. The fact that this is associated with Internet Explorer or Chrome or Inkscape or any other program means nothing on how it's going to work. Okay. Oh, feel free to take care of your thumbnails at this time. Okay, so let's just do that while we're in here, and we'll make that the last part of the class, I guess. So if you go to our website, over on the left side, there's the Learn section. And under Inkscape, there is viewing thumbnails for SVG files. So I have a video on this too, but you can click here to download it. This does matter which version of Windows you have. So most people today have the 64-bit version of Windows, and so we want to download the 64-bit version. If you are unsure which version you have, you want to go to Control Panel, go to System, and it will tell you which version you have. System type. Mine says 64-bit operating system. So if you have that, you will download this one. If you have the 32-bit version, you'll download the one that says i386. And now that that is downloaded, I'm going to install it. Oh, it told me that it wasn't going to do it here. It must need some permissions. See, you put me on the spot. Now it's not working. Let's see what happens here. All user account controls turned up on this system. So I'm going to go into Control Panel, user accounts. User account control settings are too high. I'm going to turn that down. It's still not letting me do it. Well, let's see what's happening here. Why is it not letting me do it? I've not seen an extension that will let Chrome do it. So basically, after you install this extension that I'm talking about here, I'll have to find out why that's not running. I may not even be able to do it here live on the video. But after you do that, you have to have this associated with Internet Explorer. So you would want to, if it says Chrome, if your SVG files show a Chrome document, you're going to want to right-click on it, click Open With, and then choose Other App. Choose another app. You want to choose Internet Explorer and then choose Always Use. So that's what you want to do there. Okay. And if you click on it, it'll just open in Internet Explorer and show it to you. But boy, this is, I might have to do this offline and figure out why that's not working. Like I said, it's a brand new computer, so it has a bunch of stuff turned on it. And I've tried running it as administrator, and it just doesn't like it for some reason. It's probably some kind of thing in the system security that tells it to install without it being signed or something. But I'll figure that out and get back to everyone and try to let you know what I had to do to get that installed, because I do need that installed. I have tons of SVG files. So, but that should pretty much take care of that for you. I think I've covered pretty much everything in the beginner class. That's a little bit less than 2 hours. That wasn't too bad. What else? Do we have any questions or anything? See what people are, kind of things people are asking, and what I might be able to answer before we wrap this up tonight. My drink's empty, if you heard that. Again, that Inkscape playlist that you might want to check out, if you go to my YouTube channel and you check out Learn Inkscape. If you type in TroyTube Learn Inkscape, these two videos are, like I said, they're real boring. They're me talking, just like you've listened to me talk for almost 2 hours tonight. But they are extremely important, especially this first one. And then these videos, the other 6 videos, what I tell people to do is to go through them and do them over and over again until you can import your SVG file you created into Design Space and do it all by yourself without watching the video with no errors. Now, I'll tell you, there is something that's pretty much an erroneous error that pops up sometimes, actually quite often, and that is you'll import an SVG file and it will say that the image, the SVG file contains auto flow text elements, and that is usually an erroneous error. You can ignore it, move on, and everything's usually okay after that. So, will this be safe? Yes, you can watch this at any time. This will be live on the YouTube channel. I tried not to blabber too much at the beginning and just get right into it, so people didn't have to put up with me blabbering. Well, I'll blabber at the end. I guess, at this point, a lot of people know who I am and who we are at 651vinyl.com. Yes, Chrome has no effect on Internet Explorer, being associated with your SVG files. You just associate it with Internet Explorer. That the extension that shows thumbnails works with Internet Explorer. What it's associated with has no effect whatsoever on you being able to import or upload your SVG files to any other program. And I like to point out especially when you download SVG files. Let's say if you bought files from somewhere and when you download and unzip them, a lot of times they'll come in multiple formats like PNG files, DXF files, JPEGs, and all that. The thing about that is if you don't have those file extensions turned on, you don't know which file you're working with. And a lot of people will go to upload or import a file and they'll choose the one that they see the thumbnail for, and a lot of times that's just the PNG or the JPEG, and they're ignoring the one that might be associated with Chrome or Internet Explorer when that's the actual SVG file, and so they get really confused. Silhouette Studio Design. Actually, if you have, I think it's Business Edition of Silhouette Studio, you can save your file as an SVG file. There is a website that you can convert a Silhouette Studio file to an SVG if you Google it, but depending on your design, it may not work quite as smoothly as what you're expecting. So, Vicky took her pain meds right when she got the alert, so I bet you had a really good time tonight. Good, Susan. I'm glad you're not intimidated. You know what? The secret is, Betty, if you go to our website, go to the Learn section under Inkscape, you'll find that extension. The secret to not being intimidated is you got to remember that computers and software are nothing unless you do something with it. So it's really hard to do something that can't just be fixed easily. You hit undo, go backwards. Probably the biggest obstacle a lot of people have with Inkscape is they install it, they open it, they see this blank screen, and they're like, where do I go from there? I don't know what to click on. I don't know what to do. And that Learn Inkscape playlist I have really addresses that and gets you in and get your feet wet and get you started on it. So I really, really, encourage you to not be scared of it, not to be scared of your computer. Don't be scared of your machine. I even did a video last year when I was doing my vlog. I was doing a daily vlog for a while, and it was like, I was like, there's a video that says like, get it out of the box or something like that. I mean, people are scared to get their machines and their heat presses out of the box. Don't be scared of it. You can't be scared of it. You can't be frustrated with it. 5 years ago in January, so I think it was about January 20th, probably the third week of January, 5 years ago, 2015, I went up to Columbus, Indiana. They were sold out everywhere. You couldn't find them anywhere, but Menards had the Cricket Explorer, the old original green one, and I bought it. Tammy had been bugging me for a couple of weeks that she wanted one, and I was at first I was like, I don't want anything to do with this. I'm an IT guy, and I'm a consultant, and I do like consulting for investors and whatever, that work I was doing at the time. And she talked me into going up and getting it. Brought it back. This was on a Saturday, and this is right after this a couple weeks after I had lost my job and I was out of work for a few months. And within like 15 minutes, I was cutting out these really cool little intricate shapes. And no lie, I sent her a text. She was out somewhere running around, and I sent her a text and I said, "This thing is badass." That's what I said to her. And then Sunday, I got so frustrated with it, I put it in the box, I put it on her desk, and I said, I don't ever want to see it again. And then Monday morning, I went, got it back off her desk. I said, I can't let this thing beat me. I was still unemployed, needed some things to do. And, I went and put it on my desk. And it was on my desk for almost 2 years after that berry cutter. And we used it to pay our bills for like 4 or 5 months while I was out of work. It was really incredible. And that's what put me where I am today with our company and everything. So don't let anything intimidate you when it comes to that. Betty, if you go to the Learn section and then go to Inkscape, you'll find an article in there on that extension that says how to view thumbnails, I think is what it's called. You are very welcome. So, again, I just wanted to try to, break the monotony tonight, break up this nonsense about the coronavirus and all the panic that's going on out there. I know it's a bad thing. I know it's a bad virus. It's ugly. I posted on my wall today that Google sent out what I thought was the most common sense information that I've seen yet. It said, hands, wash them often. Elbows, cough into it. So cough into your arm. Don't cough into your hands where you're not only spreading it around or maybe even touching your eyes, nose, and mouth with your hands, which is the next one. Face, don't touch your face. Feet, stay more than 3 feet apart from other people when you're out in public. If you feel sick, stay home, monitor your symptoms and everything. Viruses they've been around forever. There's no cure for them. There's no prevention for them. All you can do is take precautions against it. And the same things applies to this, in my view, that other things, if you're sick, you have pneumonia, bronchitis, all these other things, stay away from nursing homes and children and sick people who have compromised immune systems. That's the same rules that apply. So don't. I just don't see a reason to create all this panic at this point, because the people that have had it, it's like a really bad flu. I know it's relative to the SARS that was out several years ago, and that was a pretty bad thing. And they were able to contain it pretty quickly. I've done a lot of reading on this stuff, and so I'm just not going to change my life around this virus that's out there, because we all have to work and we have lives to lead and everything. And I just want people to not panic and go out and buy up all the toilet paper. I mean, come on. So exactly. If you have a diagnosis, somebody said they have a diagnosis 20 minutes from them. And so, if you're high risk, stay away from it. Just looking at the chat here, see if there's anything. Wash your hands. Don't sit on the toilet seat. So hopefully everyone found that helpful. So Glenda, you remember when I was brand new in the cricket community. Wow, that is, there's several people that had tell me every now and then they've been following me since, for 5 years since we got started in this. And it was a fun time. I wouldn't trade it for the world, even though life was kind of tough at sometimes. But we Cricket had a bad release of their software in like April 2015. If you probably remember that if you were around then. And I happened to figure out what was wrong with it before Cricket did, and they asked me to release a video in the workaround, and that was the takeoff of my YouTube channel, and really got me going. And Dewana, who runs the big cricket group that has like 300,000 people, she really encouraged me to do videos. She really liked my videos that I had put out, and I owe a lot to her and the management team at Cricket. I tell you, the Cricket has their upper management team. I went to the Make-a-thon, the last Make-a-thon they had, which was about a year and a half ago. Yes, it's been 5 years, Rhonda, since I got started in this. It's been 3.5 since you and I got together and started doing this online. But went to the Cricket Make-a-thon about a year and a half ago, and actually got to meet all the Cricket management team in person. all the top management team, and they couldn't have been more welcoming to me. I was, very. I had a great time out there. I had a group of people that I hung out with all week, and just really had a wonderful time. And I remember a couple of people seeing me across the hallway and coming over and grabbing my arm and said, "Hey, come over and let's talk," because they knew who I was, and it was just a really, really welcoming feeling that I had out there, and I had a really good time with those folks. And went out there a few weeks ago and had some meetings. So it's been a really crazy ride, and watching our company grow, and what we've been able to do, and what we're going to do this year. I think this is going to be the fun year for us. We've spent the last 3 years growing like mad. We have a strong chance of being named the fastest growing company in our region this summer, if they don't cancel that because of the virus. But anyway, this year you've heard me talk about this in the group. We've taken over the additional warehouse space we have, and making a lot of changes and plans right now. And we're making a lot of adjustments and getting prepared for a lot of new products. I think you guys are going to be really, really surprised this year at the different products we're going to roll out, and what we're going to do, and some of the approaches we're going to take and roll out there. There's some big things coming. Couldn't be more excited for the business from that aspect. So, Betty, you might be running the same thing I had with this error that was stopping me from running it. So if I can get that figured out, I'll do a video on that in the next day or two and get that out there. When's the next lesson? I don't know. This was an impromptu class tonight. I just decided literally less than an hour before we went live with this class that I was going to do this. And I what made me think about that was a few years ago, there was an outage on Design Space and went down one night, and like everybody was offline, nobody could work. And I said, hey, let's do a Design Space or an Inkscape class and just get everybody's mind off of it. And I decided to do the same thing tonight. So we'll see what the future holds. In the meantime, if you want to know more, if you feel like this beginner class was good for you, and you want to go do some other things, there's the Inkscape how-tos playlist, which has specific things in it. So if I can go, let's find this here, Inkscape how-tos, somewhere here. Well, let me see if I can find it here. Inkscape how-tos. Go to my home playlist here. Well, I'm glad this has been a good distraction. I think some of the distraction probably overloaded some people tonight. But here we go, Inkscape how-tos. And so I have a lot of specific videos in here on how to do different things with Inkscape. How to do offsets and patterns. Here's that, what I call a reverse knockout. That was the one I used, that exclusion feature that I showed you. There's curving text videos, all kinds of stuff in here. Different things that you can do, how to conform things to a shape. Here's how to do a monogram with a layer using Inkscape. So a lot of different things here, and different tutorials and fun things that I've done over time. So you are very welcome. So okay, well, I will let everyone go for the evening, and I will quit blabbering. I've got to get to bed myself. Got a long day tomorrow. Tomorrow is Monday, of course. So Hope everyone has a good evening. Hopefully you enjoyed the class and learned at least one or two things tonight. If you didn't, go look at that Learning Inkscape playlist and go look at the Inkscape how-tos if you feel like you've advanced past that. And I appreciate everyone's time attending. We'll see what the future holds on some more live stream classes in the near future.